The text that changed everything. I was in the middle of helping Mrs. Peterson choose a scarf when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw a text from my husband, Mark. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account. I didn't react. My hands stayed steady as I wrapped Mrs. Peterson's purchase in silver paper. My voice remained calm as I thanked her for shopping with us. The only sign that my husband had just destroyed our 12-year marriage with a text was the slight tightening around my eyes. Once the boutique was locked up for the day, I finally responded. Good luck. At 38 years old, I had just received the most heartless breakup message imaginable, but while Mark probably pictured me crying over his betrayal, I wasn't. Instead, I walked to my car, drove home, and made myself a cup of tea. I wasn't shocked. I had seen the signs for months, his late nights, his sudden obsession with the gym, the way he guarded his phone like it held national secrets. 3 months ago, I found a restaurant receipt for $2. That same night, I opened a separate bank account. A week later, when Mark suggested merging our finances to simplify things, I agreed, with a smile, while quietly transferring my savings into my new account. The money he had just stolen, it was only a small amount, just enough to make him think he had pulled off a grand betrayal. The real savings, along with detailed records of his shady transactions, were safe. Another text from Mark. Don't bother begging. Melissa and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later. Melissa, the bubbly, fresh out of college receptionist from his office. I met her at the Christmas party. I saw how she laughed too hard at Mark's jokes, how she found reasons to touch his arm. She was young, naive, and thought she had won a prize. I didn't respond. Instead, I called my lawyer. We had spoken 2 months ago when I first found hotel charges on our credit card. It's time, I said. He finally made his move, she asked. Yes, go ahead and file the papers, but don't rush to serve him. Let him enjoy his little victory first. Mark texted again. I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger. After all, at least you have your little shop to keep you busy. My little shop, the boutique I had built from the ground up, the one that made more money than his mid-level management job, the one I had wisely kept separate from our joint finances. I smiled, knowing what awaited him in Miami, certified legal documents that would wipe that smug grin off his face. That evening, I sat in my home, the one I inherited from my grandmother. Mark had begged me for years to put his name on the deed. I never did. Another smart decision. While gathering documents for my lawyer, I came across our wedding album. I stared at the photos of the man I had married, the man who, back then, had been kind, funny, and full of dreams. Now, he was just a cliché, a middle-aged man trying to relive his youth. He wore tight shirts that didn't suit his softening body. He threw around slang that sounded ridiculous coming from a 45-year-old. My phone buzzed again. More messages from Mark, each one more arrogant than the last. I've been planning this for months. Melissa understands me in ways you never could. You'll be fine. Maybe you'll find someone your own age. Already told my family. They agree. It just wasn't working. It's nobody's fault, really. I screenshotted everything, adding them to my growing evidence folder. Mark was making my lawyer's job easy. Then came the final message. By the way, I used the joint credit card to book our flights and hotel. Consider it my parting gift. LOL. Perfect. I called the credit card company. I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel a card immediately. Of course, ma'am. Which charges are in question? 2 first-class tickets to Miami and a luxury hotel stay at the Royal Palm. Also, please remove my husband as an authorized user. Do you have proof these were unauthorized? Yes, I have text messages from my husband admitting he used our joint card to fund his trip with another woman after draining our bank account. I can send them to you now. The customer service rep tried to sound professional, but I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Understood, ma'am. Those charges will be cancelled immediately. The next morning, Mark and Melissa would arrive at the airport, only to find their tickets invalid. Their dream hotel would have no reservation, and Mark's financial freedom, gone. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. Don't worry about the house. I'll let you stay there until you find something smaller. I actually laughed out loud. Did he really think he had any claim to my grandmother's house? Did he think I was that foolish? Then, the final insult. And I know the shop means a lot to you. We can work out a fair payment for your half. My half of the business I built, that he never lifted a finger to help with, the business he had mocked and dismissed. I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive bottle I had been saving for a special occasion. This qualified. Tomorrow, Mark would learn some hard lessons about property law, separate assets, and the consequences of underestimating me. But tonight, I was going to enjoy my peace. Life wasn't over, it was just beginning. Moving forward, I did. And I didn't feel the need to explain myself to anyone. Mark's family, his friends, people who had barely spoken to me in years, suddenly wanted to reach out. They called, they left voicemails, they sent messages pretending to be supportive, but I knew the truth. If they had truly cared, they would have spoken up when they saw the way Mark treated me. They would have reached out when I was struggling in my marriage, not just now, when it was convenient. Their words might have meant something weeks ago, but now, it felt like they were just rats deserting a sinking ship. So, I let their calls go to voicemail and didn't bother listening to the messages. Life, ironically, had never been better. The boutique was thriving, partly due to local gossip about my situation. Women in town, many of whom had been through similar betrayals, started showing up just to support me. Some walked in just to browse but left with bags full of new clothes and accessories. One customer lingered at the checkout counter, holding a designer handbag before finally deciding to buy it. As I rang up her purchase, she sighed. My ex pulled the same stunt, she said, thought he could take everything in the divorce. These men never expect us to be smarter than them. I smiled, they really don't. Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing with messages from Mark. His tone changed constantly. 1 minute, he was angry. The next, he was trying to guilt me into responding. You've ruined everything. I never meant to hurt you. You'll regret being so vindictive. Can't we work something out? That business would be nothing without my support. I didn't bother answering. Instead, I forwarded every message to my lawyer. Let him keep digging his own grave. Through mutual acquaintances, I started hearing things about Mark and Melissa's happily ever after. Apparently, reality had hit Melissa hard. What once seemed like an exciting, passionate affair had turned into something far less glamorous. Mark had no money. He couldn't afford to move into his own place. Instead of fancy dinners and luxury hotels, he was now a broke middle-aged man sleeping in her tiny studio apartment, eating takeout from the dollar menu. The man who once took her to high-end restaurants now struggled to pay for groceries. The age gap, which had once felt thrilling, was now just awkward. She was in her early 20s, full of energy and dreams. Mark, he was in his mid-40s, complaining about back pain and reminiscing about the good old days. Melissa had started posting vague quotes about toxic relationships and learning from mistakes. My lawyer, who had been keeping an eye on things, mentioned it casually during one of our calls. She also removed her relationship status this morning. She added, I almost felt bad for Mark. Almost. But then I remembered the way he had laughed in that first message, the way he had mocked me, the way he had assumed I'd be helpless without him. Instead of pity, I felt something else, pride. Pride in myself for planning ahead, pride in my quiet strength, pride in the fact that, while Mark had been busy trying to betray me, I had been smart enough to protect myself. By the time we had our final divorce hearing, Mark's confidence was gone. He no longer looked like the smug, victorious man he had imagined himself to be. Melissa was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it that she had already moved on, to a coworker her own age, someone who didn't come with financial baggage and a midlife crisis. Mark had also lost the expensive new wardrobe he had bought for himself during his reinvention. Turns out, when you have no money, you can't afford designer clothes. His lawyer looked exhausted, probably from trying, and failing, to find loopholes in the documentation I had carefully prepared. At one point, his lawyer tried to argue that, despite my keeping my business separate, Mark had contributed to its success. Your Honor, the lawyer said, my client may not have been financially involved, but he provided moral support that helped his wife's business grow. My lawyer didn't even hesitate. Moral support, she repeated, like these text messages belittling my client's boutique as a little shop, or these social media posts calling it her hobby. The judge barely concealed their irritation. The final settlement reflected the truth. I got everything that was mine, my house, my business, my separate assets. Mark got to keep his personal belongings and his car, which, unfortunately for him, was worth less than the amount he still owed on it. As we stepped out of the courthouse, Mark turned to me. His face was filled with anger, bitterness, and a hint of desperation. "You've destroyed me," he hissed. "I have nowhere to go. I'll have to move back in with my parents." I looked at him, completely calm. "No, Mark, you destroyed yourself," I said simply. "I just made sure you couldn't destroy me too." His mother was already outside, waiting to drive him home, to her home. His childhood bedroom was now his reality at 45 years old. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had mocked my age was now living under his mother's roof while I continued running my successful business. He turned to me one last time, a look of realization on his face. "You planned this all along," he accused. "You knew this would happen." I shook my head. "No, Mark, I just paid attention." I gave him a small smile, the kind you give when you know you've already won. "And unlike you," I added, "I understood the value of keeping good records." His mother stepped forward then, her face red with frustration. "That's enough, Mark," she snapped. "You've embarrassed yourself enough already." As they walked away, I could hear her scolding him like a child. "Honestly, what were you thinking, a 20-year-old, emptying bank accounts, sending those horrible texts?" I watched them disappear into the parking lot. And for the first time in years, I felt nothing but relief. Mark had thought he was writing the ending to our story with that cruel text message. Instead, he had simply triggered the moment I had been preparing for all along. I pulled out my phone as it buzzed in my hand, but this time, it wasn't Mark's desperate texts. It was a notification from my boutique's website. Another online order. Another sale. Another sign that life was moving forward. Just not in the direction Mark had imagined.